I never thought I'd have to fight for animals that were already legally mine. The day I found my prize-winning thoroughbreds missing from their stables was the day I discovered just how far some people would go to get what they wanted. What Karen Whitfield and her Maple Ridge estates didn't know was that they hadn't just messed with any horse owner. They'd seized the prized animals of the State Equestrian Commissioner himself, and I was about to make them regret every second of it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. When my father passed away last spring, I inherited Silver Creek Ranch, our family's 180-acre property just outside Cedar Valley. The sprawling land had been in our family for 3 generations, boasting some of the finest equestrian facilities in the state. My career had taken me to the city where I'd established myself as a respected figure in equestrian circles, eventually being appointed as the State Equestrian Commissioner 2 years ago. With my busy schedule, I couldn't visit the ranch as often as I should have, but my father had excellent staff maintaining the property and caring for our award-winning horses. My phone rang at 5:30 a.m. on a Thursday. It was Tom Ramirez, our elderly neighbor who had worked as a ranch hand for my father for decades. "Mike, you need to get here now." Tom's voice was shaking with anger. "They've taken your horses, all 8 of them, loaded them into trailers before dawn." "What? Who took them?" I sat bolt upright in bed, immediately alert. "That Maple Ridge? A woman and her goons. They had some papers they waved around, said the horses were violating community standards and had been impounded. They're saying part of your pasture belongs to their development now." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The Maple Ridge Estates was a new luxury housing development that had begun construction near our property line about a year ago. I'd heard they had an overzealous HOA, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. "I'm on my way," I told Tom, already throwing clothes into a bag. "Don't let anyone else on the property until I get there." The 3-hour drive to Cedar Valley was the longest of my life. I called the local sheriff's office, but was told they couldn't intervene in what they considered a civil dispute, and suggested I bring documentation proving ownership. As if I needed to prove I owned my own horses. I arrived at Silver Creek Ranch just after 9 a.m. The 8 empty stalls in our main stable made my stomach clench. These weren't just any horses. Among them was Midnight Commander, a black stallion who had won the state championship 3 years running, and Aurora's Dawn, a chestnut mare with bloodlines that went back to Triple Crown winners. Together, they were worth over $1 million, not to mention their sentimental value. Tom was waiting for me by the stables, his weathered face lined with concern. "They came with 3 trailers," he explained, "professional handlers at least. The horses weren't mistreated during loading, but they had no right." "Did they show you any kind of court order?" I asked. Tom shook his head. "Just some HOA paperwork, claiming your North Pasture violates their community standards ordinance. Because it's within their jurisdiction now. They said the horses were creating unsanitary conditions near their model homes. This was absurd. Our pastures were immaculate, and the property line was clearly marked. I had to see for myself what was happening. I drove to the entrance of Maple Ridge Estates, a gaudy stone archway with pretentious gold lettering. A security guard stopped me at the gate. "I need to speak with whoever's in charge," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My horses were taken from my property this morning." "You'll want to speak with Mrs. Whitfield, the HOA president," the guard replied, looking uncomfortable. "She's at the community center for the new resident orientation." The Maple Ridge Community Center was a sprawling building with pristine landscaping. Inside, a group of well-dressed people were listening to a presentation about property values and community standards. At the front stood Karen Whitfield, a woman in her 50s with an expensive blonde bob, and a power suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. I waited until she finished speaking, then approached her directly. "Mrs. Whitfield, I'm Michael Harrison from Silver Creek Ranch. I understand you've taken my horses from my property this morning." She studied me with cool detachment, like I was a door-to-door salesman interrupting her day. "Mr. Harrison, yes, your animals were in violation of our community bylaws. They've been temporarily relocated to a suitable facility. Those horses are championship thoroughbreds, and they were on my property, not yours," I said, struggling to maintain my composure. "I want them returned immediately." Karen's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding about property lines. According to our surveys, the North Pasture falls within Maple Ridge boundaries. We've been planning this expansion for over a year." "That's impossible," I said. "That land has been in my family for generations." She handed me a business card. "You're welcome to have your attorney contact ours. In the meantime, the animals are being well cared for at Valley View Stables. At your expense, of course. The relocation fee is $5,000 plus daily boarding." My mind was reeling. $5,000. Daily boarding for 8 thoroughbreds would run hundreds per day. This was nothing short of extortion. "This isn't legal," I said. "You can't just take someone's animals." "We can, when they're on our property," she replied smoothly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have new residents to welcome." As she turned away, I noticed a map on the wall behind her showing planned expansions of Maple Ridge Estates. To my shock, nearly 40 acres of Silver Creek Ranch were shaded as Phase 3 of their development. Back at the ranch, I called every lawyer in Cedar Valley, but was told the same thing. Karen Whitfield's husband, Robert, was a major investor in the area, and few wanted to go against him. Finally, Emma Chen, my legal advisor at the State Equestrian Commission, agreed to drive down to help me. "We need to find the original property surveys," Emma said when she arrived. "Your father must have kept records." My father had been meticulous about documentation, but I hadn't gone through his office since his death. It was time. The small home office was exactly as he'd left it. Bookshelves lined with equestrian manuals, breeding records, and family photographs. His desk was organized with military precision, a habit from his army days. I started with the filing cabinet while Emma checked the computer files. Hours passed as we searched through decades of paperwork. Just as frustration was setting in, I noticed something odd. The measurements in a recent property tax assessment didn't match older documents. "Emma, look at this," I called her over. "The northern boundary has changed on these documents." She compared them side by side. "You're right. According to this 1985 survey, your property extends almost a quarter mile further north than what's shown in last year's tax documents." Something wasn't adding up. My father would never have sold that land without telling me. I remembered. He'd been particularly concerned about developers in his final months. "We need to find more evidence," I said, pulling out drawer after drawer. It was nearly midnight when I noticed a small safe behind a painting of our first championship horse. The combination was my mother's birthday. Typical Dad. Inside was a folder labeled "Property Important," containing the original deed, surveys from the 1970s, and a letter addressed to me. "Mike," it began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and someone's making a move on our land. The developers from Maple Ridge have been pressuring me to sell the North Pasture for years. Recently, their surveyor came out and placed new markers without permission. I've documented everything and filed complaints with the county, but Robert Whitfield has friends in the assessor's office. Trust the original surveys and the landmarks. The old oak at Cooper's Creek marks our true boundary. They can change papers, but they can't move that tree. I've been gathering evidence of their tactics. It's all here. Fight for what's ours, son. Attached were photographs of surveyors moving boundary markers, emails from Robert Whitfield with veiled threats, and correspondence with the county showing my father's protests had been ignored. Emma studied the documents with growing concern. This is serious, Mike. They've been systematically altering official records to steal your land. But with these original documents and your father's evidence, we have a strong case. The next morning, we visited the county records office. A clerk named David helped us compare the original surveys with current records. "This doesn't make sense," David said, looking troubled. "There's no record of a sale, yet the property line has definitely changed in our system. And look at this, the change was made last September." "When my father was in the hospital for heart surgery," I said grimly, "he couldn't possibly have approved this." Armed with copies of the discrepancies, we filed an emergency injunction to stop any construction near the disputed boundary and demanded the immediate return of my horses. Judge Martinez, relatively new to Cedar Valley and not yet in Robert Whitfield's pocket, granted the injunction within hours. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When I arrived at Valley View Stables with the court order, the manager looked relieved. "I knew something wasn't right about this," he confessed. "Mrs. Whitfield said these horses were neglected and seized for their welfare, but they're in perfect condition, some of the finest animals I've ever seen." By evening, all 8 horses were back in their stables at Silver Creek. I should have felt victorious, but I knew this was just the beginning. The Whitfields wouldn't give up easily. Sure enough, at 7 a.m. the next day, Karen Whitfield appeared at my gate with 2 Maple Ridge security vehicles. "You're in violation of multiple HOA regulations," she announced, handing me a thick envelope. "The fine is $10,000, due immediately." I leafed through the absurd violations: unapproved fencing design, excessive animal waste near community property, unauthorized commercial activity. "This is harassment," I said. "None of this land is part of your HOA." "The county records say otherwise," she replied with smug confidence. "And until the court makes a final ruling, we'll continue to enforce our standards. We have a beautiful community to protect." As she was leaving, she turned back. "By the way, the water rights to Cooper's Creek have been reassigned to Maple Ridge for our decorative ponds. Your access will be cut off next week." Cooper's Creek was the main water source for our pastures and stables. Without it, maintaining the ranch would become nearly impossible. After she left, I received a call from Sheriff Donovan. "Mike, I wanted to give you a heads up. Maple Ridge has filed a complaint claiming your horses are a public nuisance. They're pushing for an animal control inspection." "They just returned the horses they stole from me," I said in disbelief. "I know." The sheriff sounded uncomfortable. "But Robert Whitfield plays golf with the county commissioner every Sunday. They're putting pressure from all sides." I thanked him for the warning and called Emma. "They're escalating," I told her. "We need to move faster with our case." "I've been doing some digging," she replied. "You're not the only one they've done this to. 3 other properties bordering Maple Ridge have lost land through suspicious boundary changes in the last 2 years." She was right. We needed more allies and more evidence. That afternoon, Tom introduced me to his nephew, Marcus Johnson, who sat on the Maple Ridge HOA board. "I've been uncomfortable with what's happening," Marcus admitted, looking nervously over his shoulder as we spoke in my kitchen. "Karen and Robert run the HOA like their personal kingdom. The rest of us are just for show." "Would you be willing to share information about their methods?" I asked. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "They've gone too far this time. Taking someone's animals crosses a line." He showed us internal HOA emails discussing strategies to pressure property owners, manipulate boundaries, and use regulatory harassment to force sales at below market rates. Look at this budget, he pointed out. Homeowners pay $800 monthly in dues, but only a fraction goes to actual maintenance. The rest disappears into management fees to companies owned by the Whitfields. That's embezzlement, Emma said. Marcus nodded. And there's more. They've been using HOA funds to bribe county officials. That's how they get permits approved so quickly and boundary changes processed without questions. This was bigger than just my property. It was systematic corruption that affected the entire community. As we developed our legal strategy, the harassment continued. My driveway was blocked by maintenance vehicles that never seemed to move. Prospective clients cancelled appointments to see my horses after receiving anonymous warnings about disease on the property. The private road to the ranch was suddenly marked as HOA members only. But the Whitfields had made one critical mistake. They had no idea who they were dealing with. At a meeting with Emma and Jessica Parker, a local journalist interested in our story, I decided it was time to reveal my full identity. What exactly is a State Equestrian Commissioner? Jessica asked, taking notes. I oversee equestrian welfare standards throughout the state, I explained. My office has regulatory authority over horse facilities, competition standards, and animal welfare in equestrian contexts. We work closely with the Department of Agriculture and state law enforcement. Jessica's eyes widened. So when they seized your championship horses, they didn't just steal from a private citizen, Emma finished. They interfered with a state official's protected property. That elevates this from a civil dispute to a potential criminal case. The next day, Jessica's article ran in the Cedar Valley Tribune with the headline, State Equestrian Commissioner's Prize, Horses Seized by Local HOA in Land Grab Attempt. The story detailed the Whitfields' pattern of boundary manipulation, financial improprieties, and their theft of championship horses worth over $1 million from a state official. By evening, the story had been picked up by regional news outlets. My phone rang constantly with calls from other HOA victims, state officials offering support, and horse owners outraged by the treatment of championship animals. The court date for our property dispute was still weeks away, but public opinion had shifted dramatically overnight. The Maple Ridge HOA was suddenly under intense scrutiny. Karen Whitfield, however, wasn't backing down. The next morning, she appeared on local television, defending her actions. This is simply about maintaining community standards, she insisted to the interviewer. The Harrison property has been in violation of numerous county ordinances. The animals were temporarily relocated for their own welfare. But when pressed about the altered boundary records and the lack of legal authority to seize livestock, she became flustered. We have all the proper documentation. The Harrisons are troublemakers trying to interfere with progress. What she didn't know was that I had already met with the state attorney general, who had launched an investigation into the county records office and the suspicious pattern of boundary changes benefiting Maple Ridge estates. 2 days later, I received an unexpected visitor. Robert Whitfield himself came to the ranch, alone and looking considerably less confident than his wife. "This has gotten out of hand," he said, declining my offer of coffee. "We should discuss a reasonable settlement. Return my full property according to the original boundaries, pay for damages, and make public apologies to everyone affected by your boundary schemes," I replied. He scoffed. "Be realistic. We've invested millions in planning our expansion." "Based on fraudulent property lines," I countered. "The Attorney General is already investigating. How realistic is it to think you'll avoid charges?" Robert's face paled slightly. "Perhaps we can find middle ground." But I wasn't interested in compromise, not after what they'd done. "The time for negotiation was before you stole my horses and tried to seize my land," I told him. "Now we'll let the courts and the Attorney General sort it out." As he left, I noticed something I hadn't seen before: genuine fear in his eyes. The Whitfields were used to being the most powerful. People in the room, used to others backing down. For the first time, they were facing someone they couldn't intimidate or outmaneuver. That evening, I called a community meeting at the Cedar Valley Town Hall. Nearly 300 people attended. Maple Ridge residents unhappy with the exorbitant HOA fees and dictatorial rules. Neighboring property owners concerned about boundary. Disputes and supporters from the equestrian community outraged by the seizure of championship horses. I stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of concerned faces. "Many of you know me as Mike Harrison from Silver Creek Ranch," I began. "But I'm also the State Equestrian Commissioner, appointed to protect the welfare and interests of horses and the equestrian community throughout our state." Murmurs spread through the crowd as those who hadn't read the news realized who they were listening to. "What happened to my horses and my property isn't an isolated incident," I continued. "The Maple Ridge HOA, under Karen and Robert Whitfield, has engaged in a pattern of boundary manipulation, financial impropriety, and illegal harassment to expand their development at the expense of surrounding properties." One by one, other victims came forward to share their stories. Marcus Johnson presented HOA financial records showing misappropriation of funds. Emma outlined the legal case against the boundary changes. By the end of the meeting, we had formed the Cedar Valley Property Owners Alliance with over 150 members committed to fighting the Whitfield's corrupt practices. As I drove back to the ranch that night, I felt a strange sense of gratitude toward Karen Whitfield and her misguided attempt to seize my horses. If she had simply left me alone, I might never have discovered her scheme to steal our land. I might never have found my father's hidden evidence or connected with others who had been victimized. Sometimes I reflected, the most effective trap isn't the one you set yourself, but the one your opponent unwittingly creates. Karen thought she was dealing with an absentee ranch owner she could easily intimidate. Instead, she had challenged the State Equestrian Commissioner with the authority, connections, and determination to not only protect his own property, but to bring her entire operation crashing down. Tomorrow would bring new challenges in our fight against the Maple Ridge HOA. But for tonight, I found comfort in the soft nickering of my horses, safely back in their stables where they belonged. The morning of our court hearing arrived with a sense of electric anticipation. I'd barely slept, running through arguments and evidence in my mind. Emma had prepared meticulously, organizing our documentation into a compelling narrative of corruption and fraud. As I fed the horses their morning grain, I patted Midnight Commander's glossy neck. "Today we fight for Silver Creek," I told him quietly. He nickered in response, as if understanding the gravity of the day ahead. The Cedar Valley Courthouse was packed beyond capacity. Local residents, news crews, and curious onlookers filled every available seat. I spotted Karen and Robert Whitfield huddled with their attorneys at the front of the room, their usual confidence noticeably diminished. Karen's perfectly coiffed hair couldn't hide the tension in her shoulders as she whispered urgently to her lawyer. Judge Eleanor Martinez entered, her stern expression giving nothing away. Unlike many officials in Cedar Valley, Judge Martinez was relatively new to the area and had a reputation for impartiality. She called the hearing to order and the proceedings began. Emma presented our case with surgical precision, laying out the evidence of altered property records, fraudulent boundary changes, and the illegal seizure of my horses. She displayed the original surveys alongside the manipulated county records, highlighting the discrepancies. "Your Honor," Emma concluded, "this isn't merely a boundary dispute. This is a calculated pattern of fraud designed to steal valuable land from legitimate owners, orchestrated by the Whitfields through their control of the Maple Ridge HOA. The Whitfield's attorney, an expensive import from the city named Gregory Pearson, attempted to dismiss our evidence as outdated records and misunderstandings. He painted the Whitfields as community builders bringing prosperity to Cedar Valley, suggesting I was an absentee landowner standing in the way of progress. "Mr. Harrison barely visits the property," Pearson argued smoothly. "Meanwhile, my clients have invested millions in developing beautiful homes and amenities that benefit the entire community." Judge Martinez listened with an inscrutable expression, occasionally asking pointed questions of both sides. When Pearson claimed the horses had been temporarily relocated for health and safety reasons, the judge's eyebrow raised skeptically. "And Mr. Harrison's position as State Equestrian Commissioner didn't give you pause before seizing championship thoroughbreds from his property?" she asked. Pearson faltered. "We weren't aware of his position at the time." "But you were aware they were championship horses worth over $1 million. The animal's value wasn't the issue, Your Honor. The location was the concern." The judge made a note. "Please continue." The pivotal moment came when Marcus Johnson took the stand. As a sitting member of the Maple Ridge HOA board, his testimony carried particular weight. The board never officially approved the seizure of Mr. Harrison's horses, Marcus testified. Karen Whitfield acted unilaterally, claiming emergency powers that don't exist in our bylaws. He produced internal emails showing Karen discussing strategies to force me off my land. The goal was always to acquire the North Pasture for Phase 3 development. The horses were leverage, a way to pressure Mr. Harrison into selling. Karen's face flushed crimson. She scribbled furiously on a notepad, passing urgent messages to her attorney. When the county clerk testified about irregularities in the property records, explaining that changes had been made without proper documentation, Robert Whitfield began to look physically ill. The clerk confirmed that an internal investigation had revealed unauthorized access to the record system using the login credentials of a supervisor who happened to be a Maple Ridge resident with close ties to the Whitfields. By mid-afternoon, the momentum had clearly shifted in our favor. Judge Martinez called a brief recess before final arguments. In the courthouse hallway, I overheard raised voices from a conference room. The Whitfields were arguing with their attorney. "This is a disaster," Robert hissed. "You said this would be easily dismissed." "You didn't tell me about the record tampering," Pearson responded tersely, "or that you were targeting a state official." When court resumed, there was a palpable shift in the Whitfields' demeanor. Their attorney requested a brief sidebar with the judge. After a few minutes of hushed conversation, Judge Martinez addressed the court. "Counsel for the defendants has indicated they wish to propose a settlement. The court will recess for 1 hour to allow the parties to discuss terms." In a small conference room, Emma and I faced the Whitfields across a polished table. Their attorney outlined their offer. They would acknowledge the original property boundaries, pay a modest sum for inconvenience, and withdraw all HOA claims against Silver Creek Ranch. "Not enough," Emma replied firmly. The fraudulent boundary changes affected multiple properties, not just Mr. Harrison's, and there's the matter of the financial improprieties within the HOA itself. Karen leaned forward, her voice tight with controlled anger. "What exactly do you want?" I met her gaze steadily. "Full restoration of all affected property boundaries based on original surveys. Financial restitution to all landowners who lost property through your schemes. Your immediate resignation from the HOA board and a public apology." "Absolutely not," Karen snapped. "We've invested too much. This would bankrupt us." "Then we continue in court," Emma replied calmly. "And afterward, we proceed with the criminal complaints." Robert placed a restraining hand on his wife's arm. "What criminal complaints?" The Attorney General is particularly interested in the fraudulent modification of county records, I explained. That's a felony offense. So is the misappropriation of HOA funds, which Marcus has documented extensively. A heavy silence fell over the room. Robert whispered something to Karen, who shook her head vehemently. We need time to consider our position, their attorney finally said. Back in the courtroom, they requested an extension to prepare a more comprehensive settlement offer. Judge Martinez granted them 48 hours, but made it clear that she was prepared to rule immediately if they preferred. Based on the evidence presented, I don't believe further delay would change my assessment of the facts, she added pointedly. The message was clear. The Whitfields were going to lose and lose badly. The next morning, I received a call from Sheriff Donovan. Mike, I thought you should know there's unusual activity at the Whitfield residence. Moving vans, lots of hurried packing. My stomach tightened. They're planning to flee. Looks that way. I've notified the Attorney General's office. I immediately called Emma, who contacted Judge Martinez's chambers. By noon, the judge had issued a temporary freeze on the Whitfield's assets and a travel restriction pending resolution of our case. When Sheriff Donovan arrived at the Whitfield home to serve the order, he found Karen attempting to board a private plane at the small local airstrip. Robert was nowhere to be found, having departed hours earlier with luggage and what airport staff described as several heavy briefcases. News of Karen's attempted flight spread through Cedar Valley like wildfire. By evening, a crowd had gathered outside the Maple Ridge Community Center, demanding answers about their HOA fees and property values. Marcus Johnson stepped up as interim HOA president, promised transparency and reform. The next day, Karen Whitfield, looking considerably less polished in detention center attire, agreed to our settlement terms in full, with her husband having fled the country, later located at a resort in the Cayman Islands. She seemed eager to salvage what she could from the wreckage of their schemes. The final settlement was comprehensive. All affected property boundaries would be restored to their original specifications based on historical surveys. The Whitfields would personally reimburse all homeowners for misappropriated HOA funds, a sum totaling nearly $3 million. Karen would resign from the HOA and agree never to serve on any community board again. Most significantly, the massive Phase 3 expansion that would have destroyed my north pasture was permanently cancelled, with the land rezoned as agricultural heritage property that could never be developed. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters as Emma and I emerged after the settlement was finalized. Jessica Parker from the Cedar Valley Tribune pushed to the front. Commissioner Harrison, how do you feel about the outcome? She asked. Microphone extended. Justice has been served, not just for Silver Creek Ranch, but for everyone affected by the Whitfield schemes, I replied. This case was never just about my horses or my land. It was about protecting our community from those who would exploit and manipulate others for profit. What happens to Maple Ridge Estates now? The homeowners will elect a new board that actually represents their interests. Marcus Johnson has already implemented new financial transparency measures. The development will continue, but with respect for existing property rights and the character of Cedar Valley. As the media dispersed, Tom Ramirez approached, his weathered face split by a broad smile. Your father would be mighty proud, Mike. He fought them for years, but you finished what he started. I couldn't have done it without his foresight, I admitted. He knew exactly what evidence to gather, what to preserve for when it would be needed most. Smart man, your dad, always thinking 10 steps ahead. That evening, I sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sunset paint the north pasture in gold. The horses grazed peacefully, unaware of how close we had come to losing this land. In the distance, I could see the half-built structures of what would have been Maple Ridge's Phase 3, now abandoned and scheduled for demolition. My phone buzzed with a message from Emma. The Attorney General was proceeding with criminal charges against both Whitfields for fraud, evidence tampering, and embezzlement. Robert had been located in the Caymans and was being extradited. As satisfying as the legal victory felt, something else had emerged from this battle that was perhaps more valuable. Throughout the ordeal, I had reconnected with Silver Creek in a way I hadn't anticipated. The ranch wasn't just a piece of property I had inherited. It was a legacy, a responsibility, and increasingly, it felt like home. The next morning, I made a decision. I called my office in the city and requested an extended leave of absence. My deputy commissioner could handle the day-to-day operations while I remained available for major decisions. It was time to invest my energy in Silver Creek Ranch. Over the following months, Silver Creek underwent a transformation. I renovated the training facilities, expanded our breeding program, and opened a youth equestrian academy that provided scholarships to local children who couldn't afford riding lessons. The championship bloodlines of Midnight Commander and Aurora's Dawn would continue, but they would also help inspire a new generation of riders. Marcus Johnson became a frequent visitor, often bringing his daughters for riding lessons. The new Maple Ridge HOA under his leadership had evolved into something unrecognizable from the Whitfields' reign. Transparent, democratic, and focused on genuine community needs. 6 months after the settlement, we hosted the first annual Silver Creek Equestrian Festival. Riders from across the state competed in various disciplines, with proceeds benefiting rural land conservation efforts. Standing at the center of the show ring, watching young riders demonstrate their skills on ponies descended from our championship lines, I felt a profound sense of purpose. Sheriff Donovan joined me at the fence, clapping as a particularly skilled young rider completed a flawless jumping round. "Quite a change from last year," he observed. "Hard to believe we were in court fighting for this place." "Sometimes you don't realize what you're fighting for until you're in the middle of the battle," I replied. "The Whitfields never understood what they were really up against," he said thoughtfully. "They saw land, assets, dollar signs. They never saw the community, the heritage, or the passion." "That was their fatal mistake," I agreed. "They thought I was just an absentee heir they could intimidate. They never bothered to find out who they were really dealing with." "The State Equestrian Commissioner," the sheriff chuckled. "That must have been quite a shock when they finally realized." "The title helped," I admitted. "But what really mattered was having truth on our side, and my father's foresight in documenting everything." As if summoned by the mention of my father, Tom Ramirez approached, leading a small chestnut colt, the first offspring of Aurora's Dawn, born on Silver Creek soil since my return. "He's got his grandmother's eyes," Tom said proudly, "and that same fighting spirit." I stroked the colt's velvety nose, marveling at the perfect blend of strength and gentleness. "What are you calling him?" the sheriff asked. "Legacy's Justice," I replied. It seemed fitting. As the festival continued around us, with children laughing and horses performing, I realized something I hadn't fully appreciated before. The Whitfields had accidentally given me a precious gift. In their attempt to take what wasn't theirs, they had forced me to fight not just for land and horses, but for a future I hadn't known I wanted. Karen Whitfield, now serving time for fraud, had believed she was setting a trap for an easy target. Instead, she had walked into one herself. Not a trap I had deliberately set, but one created by her own greed and arrogance. In challenging me, she had awakened not just the State Equestrian Commissioner with regulatory authority, but a defender of Silver Creek's legacy who would never again take that responsibility lightly. The following spring, as new foals gambled in the north pasture that had nearly become a housing development, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Robert Whitfield, writing from federal prison. "I want you to know that Karen and I proceeded, based on information that the ranch was neglected and would soon be sold anyway," he wrote. "We didn't realize its significance to you or the community. I regret the methods we employed and the pain we caused. While this doesn't excuse our actions, I hope it helps explain them. I stood at the fence line where the Whitfields had once moved boundary markers under cover of darkness, watching midnight. Commander lead his herd across the lush spring grass. Robert's letter seemed a hollow attempt at justification from a man who had plenty of time to reflect on his choices. Yet in an odd way, I was grateful to them. Without their overreach, I might never have discovered my father's hidden evidence. I might never have reconnected with Silver Creek or realized my true purpose here. I might have remained in the city, visiting occasionally, perhaps eventually selling the property to someone who didn't understand its value beyond the price per acre. Emma joined me at the fence, having arrived for the weekend to help with legal paperwork for the Youth Academy's non-profit status. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, noting the letter in my hand. "Just thinking about unexpected outcomes," I replied. The Whitfields thought they were executing a perfect plan to acquire valuable property. Instead, they lost everything: their reputation, their freedom, their ill-gotten gains. "Poetic justice," Emma observed. "They never bothered to research who owned the horses they were stealing." "That was their ultimate mistake," I agreed. "Not the fraud or the boundary manipulation or even the financial improprieties. Their fatal error was not understanding what they were really fighting for, or who they were fighting against." In the golden light of the setting sun, Silver Creek Ranch stretched out before us, its boundaries now secure, its legacy preserved for another generation. The Whitfields had wanted to transform this land into something that served their vision of progress. Instead, they had inadvertently ensured it would remain what it had always been meant to be: a place where championship horses could run, free, where a family's heritage could continue, and where a community could come together around shared values. Sometimes, I reflected, the most effective trap isn't the one you set deliberately. It's the one your opponent unwittingly creates, through their own blindness and greed. Karen and Robert Whitfield had thought they were dealing with an absentee heir they could easily intimidate. Instead, they had challenged the State Equestrian Commissioner, a man with the authority, knowledge, and determination to protect not just his own property, but the integrity of the entire community they had sought to exploit. As I watched the horses heading toward the stables for their evening feed, I silently thanked my father for his foresight in preserving the evidence that saved Silver Creek. And in an odd way, I felt a touch of gratitude toward the Whitfields as well. In trying to take what was mine, they had given me something far more valuable, a clear vision of what truly mattered and the resolve to protect it at all costs. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.